What's up, guys? Nathan here. After a decidedly mediocre league start filled with slow leveling, bad theory crafting, and a few rerolls, I finally managed to settle on a build that I want to push endgame content with. And big surprise, it's another Winter Orb Elementalist. Going into Synthesis, Winter Orb lost about 15% of its damage, and as most players expected, this did literally nothing to affect the skill's overall viability. Not only is its damage still more than fine, but the skill's inherent mechanics make it feel unbelievably broken for just about all content in the game. The only real challenge with this skill is deciding how to build it. It has strong clear speed, safe bossing, and a seemingly endless amount of support gems that interact with it. It can be built as an elementalist, inquisitor, occultist, assassin, trickster, ascendant, and probably even jug. However, I personally think the elementalist version is the most fun and balanced, and thanks to this video that came out a couple weeks before synthesis, I think people are heavily undervaluing one key stat: cast speed. Contrary to common belief, cast speed not only increases the speed at which you gain stacks when charging Winter Orb, but also the rate at which it pelts your enemies with icy projectiles. This means that cast speed gives you DPS, smoother gameplay, and safer clearing. For these reasons, we heavily focus on stacking cast speed. Another unique aspect of this build is our lack of Warlord's Mark Ring. I personally dislike relying on a curse for life and mana sustain, as this makes hexproof maps and endgame bosses slightly harder than they need to be. We solve this by fossil crafting or synthesizing some life leech on a ring, as well as using veiled mods to craft away nearly the entire mana cost of Winter Orb. The last feature of this build that sets it apart from the rest is how we handle single target. Instead of using Volblade Vortex to achieve high damage but low uptime burst windows, we use Armageddon Brand. This solution is less burst DPS for instantly killing singular enemies, but it wins out in situations where a second target is present, the enemy would outlive your Vol BV, or you want to use it more often than once every 30 seconds. Plus, we link Armageddon Brand with Combustion, which in turn buffs our Winter Orb. Before getting into the guide, here are some general pros and cons of this build. Pros: ultra beginner friendly and easy playstyle. Cheap to start, can do up through yellow maps with just a tabula and some rares. Stupidly fast clear speed. Safe bossing. Can easily be built for Magic Find. And looks amazing with Herald MTX. Cons: can be very laggy both PC and server side. No leech and no regen maps require a flask swap, and elemental reflects are impossible. Not the tankiest build in the world. Next, let's take a look at the skill tree. This is a screenshot of the finished tree at level 100, but it will be mostly finished at level 87, and the clear speed can reach its full potential as early as you can finish Uberlab. Here's how I recommend leveling. Right off the bat, we start stacking cast speed by grabbing the starting witch nodes and going directly into Frostwalker. Then, rush up to Elemental Overload and Dark Arts, as that will help keep your damage feeling respectable for the time being. As far as leveling skills go, I highly recommend Freeze Pulse until you could start using Winter Orb at level 28. The next leg of your leveling journey is going to be a little painful, but is absolutely required if you want to start using Winter Orb as soon as possible. Head down to Potency of Will, then continue through Shaper and Sentinel, ultimately grabbing Exceptional Performance. If you could afford a nice jewel at this time, feel free to grab this socket to help keep your damage up while grabbing these relatively boring but necessary nodes. Also, be sure to kill all bandits in Act 2 and choose Pendulum of Destruction for your first ascendancy point. Moving forward, we can start focusing on damage. Head over to the left side of the tree, picking up big nodes like Amplify, Light of Divinity, and Holy Dominion. Then head to the right, grabbing Blast Radius, Lucidity, and these awesome nodes at the Shadow start. If you are struggling with mana costs at this point, I recommend casually running Clarity as well as rushing Lucidity as quickly as possible. Your second lab choice should be Mastermind of Discord, at which point you should try to start running all three Elemental Heralds. As you're getting into maps, your tree should look something like this. You'll want to continue to the right, grabbing nodes like Elemental Focus, Cold-Hearted Calculation, and eventually the whole phase Acrobatics wheel. At this time, you'll probably be feeling very squishy. That's because this tree is focused on providing the fastest leveling experience, not the tankiest one. If you'd rather pick up more life nodes instead of the damage ones I recommend, the life rectangle just behind the Marauder start is an excellent option. Speaking of life nodes, that will pretty much be the focus of the rest of the tree. I recommend grabbing Purity of Flesh and Herbalism first, then just fill in the life and jewel nodes as you continue to level up. One thing to know is you should not be leveling this node here, right above Sentinel, until you can afford the Green Nightmare Jewel. Now, let's take a look at the endgame gem setups. Like I said at the beginning of this guide, Winter Orb is an extremely flexible skill, so feel free to make changes to your gems as you see fit. My choices aim to be the most balanced and easy to use, but you will find plenty of varied options across all the different Winter Orb guides out there. Your most important setup is as follows: Winter Orb, greater multiple projectiles, cold to fire, faster casting, infused channeling, and concentrated effect. If you want an even lazier, low effort version of Winter Orb, feel free to run increased duration instead of concentrated effect, as this will allow you to walk around for up to 15 seconds without having to stop and cast. To supplement your single target, you want to use Armageddon Brand, Combustion, Controlled Destruction, and Concentrated Effect. Ideally, socketed in a pair of shaped gloves, but I'll get to that in a bit. Again, the reason we use Armageddon Brand over Vol Blade Vortex is for consistent damage during longer boss fights. You're free to use Vol BV instead if you'd rather focus on Burst. Another important setup is your Heralds. We run Herald of Ice, Herald of Ash, and Herald of Thunder. To make further use of your unreserved mana, you should also run a Beast aspect of your choice. Aspect of the Crab, Spider, and Avian are all viable options, but I personally recommend Aspect of the Spider for maximum DPS. Our first mobility setup is Flame Dash, Faster Casting, and Arcane Surge. As usual, your Arcane Surge needs to be the appropriate level to consistently trigger itself with every Flame Dash. However, because I recommend crafting flat mana reduction onto your rings, this level will vary. I've put up a table from the wiki showing what level your Arcane Surge should be at depending on the mana cost of your Flame Dash, but in all likelihood, you'll want it somewhere between levels 4 and 7. Your second mobility/utility setup is Blasphemy, Temporal Chains, Phase Run, and Enhance. You will only be able to use Temporal Chains once you acquire the Solstice Visual Amulet that I'll be going over in the gearing section, but Phase Run and Enhance will still put in work, keeping you speeding through maps in the meantime. Your last setup is extremely flexible. You could run a Golem, Vol Grace, Vol Righteous Fire, or even a Wither Totem if you go with the alternative gearing setup I'll be talking about later. But personally, I chose to keep it simple with a level 1 cast when damage taken, a level 3 Immortal Call, and increased duration. Because of all the skill effect duration in this build, triggering Immortal Call will grant you over a second of physical damage immunity, even with no endurance charges. The last gem I use in this setup is Portal, which should be unlinked so that it doesn't interact with cast when damage taken. Now for the juicy part of the guide, gearing. I'll be dividing this section up into 3 topics: required gear to make the build function, recommended gear that you should look into if you want to start pushing difficult content, and chase gear to look out for if you want to transition this build into total face roll status. Plus, I'll be talking about an alternative, more theoretical gear setup after this, which is worth considering if you have more currency than you know what to do with. Required. These items will allow you to easily complete all white maps, most yellow maps, and even Uber Lab if you know what you're doing. Tabula Rasa, since Winter Orb heavily benefits from being 6-linked. And its series Promise Flask for some on-demand leech and DPS. Rings with at least -4 to total mana cost of skills crafted on them. Magic flasks with anti-bleed, freeze, and curse crafts. A pair of rare wands with as much increased cast speed and spell damage as possible. Rare gear with high life and enough resist to hit 75% in cold, fire, and lightning. I should add that an Itsiri's Promise Flask and those ring crafts aren't even truly required for this build, but they're fairly easy to come by and go a long way towards making the build feel smoother and easier to play. Recommended. These items will allow you to complete all content in the game with little to moderate effort, including all red maps, Shaper, and even Uber Elder with a little practice. Impulse's Broken Heart is a huge boost to clear speed, and the increased shock effectiveness makes it a solid damage increase against bosses as well. Solstice Visual grants life, damage, and allows you to run temporal chains for free. However, those effects are secondary to the awesome buff it provides when you kill a rare or unique enemy. This buff, called Shaper's Presence, effectively increases the duration of all buffs and debuffs on you by 50%, which allows you to go even longer without having to charge up your Winter Orb. Dying Sun is a massive DPS increase for any Winter Orb build. At Series Step are some nice boots that synergize well with the relatively high amount of dodge found in the build. The challenge when running these boots is that they will make capping your resistances a little bit harder. Some source of fire damage leached as life, such as a Warlord's Mark ring, a Scorched Fossil crafted ring, or Doriani's Invitation. I'm personally trying to synthesize a ring with the fire damage leached as life implicit, but as of this video's recording, I don't recommend this option. Some Shaper gloves with the mod Socketed Gems are supported by faster casting. Endgame Chase. These items are by no means required, but will act as endgame options when deciding how to min-max your character. The Green Nightmare Jewel. This jewel grants dodge chance, extra chaos damage, and frenzy charges while clearing. All in all, the jewel gives us a lot of nice benefits, but is not required at all. Much nicer wands with stats such as cast speed, spell damage, chance to deal double damage, added cold damage to spells, and elemental damage gained as extra chaos damage. I personally recommend crafting on the Profane Wand base, as the 14% cast speed implicit makes a huge difference to the overall feel of the build. Nice Abyss Jewels, as well as a nice Stygian Vice to socket one of them in. The stats you're looking for with these are added cold damage to spells while dual wielding, and flat life. A helmet with the Winter Orb has +2 maximum stages enchant. Alternative gear. This is a theoretical idea I had, but probably won't implement myself. This route will be far more expensive than the standard build, but has a much higher upper damage scaling and slightly more life. Instead of Impulses, use the Eternity Shroud. This chest grants you more life, some chaos resistance, a cool defensive buff called Glimpse of Eternity, and a ton of extra chaos damage. Replace your wands with a spell damage scepter and a shaped mace that's similar to what's pictured here. I'll be linking a video below of Zizarin's Winter Orb build from Betrayal, where he talks about the benefits of and how to craft a mace like this. Replace every piece of gear listed earlier, aside from the gloves and Solstice Visual, with Shaper rares that grant life and resists. This will force you to spend a lot of currency buying exactly what you need and potentially doing some heavy self-crafting, but the result is gaining up to 50% of your elemental damage as extra chaos damage, as well as having all of said chaos damage ignore enemy resistances. I seriously would not recommend considering this gear setup unless you are rich and know exactly what you're doing. And there you have it. That's my personal take on the ultra popular Winter Orb Elementalist. Like I said, there are a million different ways to build Winter Orb, and while this one may not be the very best, it's how I chose to go about it. Thanks for watching, this has been Nathan, and I hope you have an awesome rest of your day.
Thank you!
Hey guys, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. I want to do a quick shout out to my Patreon supporters, Real Human, Pete, Zikrak, Squally, Zuljan, Coda, Julia, and Alan. If you're interested in supporting me and like what I do, feel free to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/NathanBrotherBob. And if you want to hang out with me and a couple of other people in the Discord we have right now, it's a little community Discord. You don't have to be a Patreon supporter or anything to hang out in there. Feel free to go to my Discord, and that's listed right there. I'm not going to try to say it because that's a lot of letters and a number. Whatever. Anyway, thank you so much for watching my video, and I hope you guys have a good one.